All right, thank you, SheCodes, for having us out. I'm excited to be here. My name is Megan Allen. This is Dr. Alex Stringer. And today we are going to be talking about organizational transformation for Air Force software and how we are standing up an innovation and research capability within sort of a giant bureaucracy. So I am Megan Allen, Director of Academic and Community Partnerships for the Air Force Software Directorate. So I do work for the United States government, but just for context, today I am actually a musician by trade. I know nothing about software. I'm not a tech person. I'm a program and project manager. That is what I've spent my career doing, specializing in organizational design. If anyone's at the Pride Parade tomorrow, this band right here, Megan and the Foxes, will be playing on the parade route. I also own a wine bar downtown, The Study. So if you're ever into that kind of thing and you want to drop in for a glass of wine, come see me.
It's fantastic.
All right, so as I discussed or mentioned, this is our topic for today. I'm going to try to go through a couple of quick high points, giving a little bit of historical context, some organizational context, just to kind of give you guys the broader scope of what we're talking about. So first up, does anyone know what this is? All right, this is the B-52. This is delivered to the United States Air Force in 1962. Still flying today and will continue to fly for a very long time. So the reason I bring this up, part of what we're talking about today is the transformation of software as it relates to weapon systems and how the complexity of software has evolved over the past several decades. So, really very analog, distributed analog when we're talking about aircraft like the B-52. Dr. Stringer can talk about this in a much more intelligent way, but certainly as we progress through time, the software capability has gotten much more complex and much more integrated. And also important to note, as it relates to the organizational construct that we're talking about today, when software first emerged as part of the Air Force's weapon systems, really was seen much more of a support component for hardware. So not something that was creating capability for that aircraft or that weapon, but something that just kind of supported the bones of the aircraft. So as the Air Force grew its software capability, that's kind of how they thought about it organizationally. So thinking about guys who are on the flight line fixing the aircraft, that's kind of how they viewed software as well. So fast forward to today, we have advanced bomber suite, advanced fighter suites, getting to the point where we can, no kidding, do in-flight software upgrades on an F-16. So really quick, sorry, I thought you had a question. Really quick crash course on Air Force organizational structure, I promise. I will do this quickly. There will be a quiz at the end, so pay attention. So there are 9 commands within the Air Force itself. Today we are talking mostly about the Air Force Materiel Command. The only thing that you need to know about this is Materiel Command provides the warfighters with the stuff they need to do what they need to do. So delivering all of the things they need on the battlefield. Within Materiel Command, there is the Air Force Sustainment Center. And this, headquartered at Tinker, pretty self-explanatory, responsible for maintaining and sustaining aircraft for the Air Force. So to build out that function, the Air Force established 3 different primary industrial depots. There's one down in Georgia, one out in Utah, and one here right at Tinker. So think of those as giant repair and mechanic shops for aircraft. And remember what I said earlier about kind of how software emerged on the aircraft and on weapon systems. So as we built out software professionals and software capability for the Air Force, they ended up tying software to these industrial complexes organizationally. So there are 3 software engineering groups at each of those 3 depots. So as you can imagine, we started to realize pretty quickly that was not going to work. As software developed, became a lot more complicated, and actually became the thing on the aircraft that was making it do what it needs to do. I always like to think about it as like it would be the same thing as taking this organization and putting them all in the same company, right? Like no one would ever do that today. But that's essentially what the Air Force did back in the day. So problems you can imagine from this misaligned organizational construct. You have competing priorities. So you have competing for resources financially, thinking about the investments that you would need to make in a hardware and mechanics shop versus, a tech store or, a software technology company, completely different. But yet here we were all sort of bunched up together in this organization. You had lack of technical expertise at the leadership level. So commanders in charge of these software organizations who knew nothing about software. So it created a lot of problems there. And then certainly different cultures. So you have a very white collar workforce in a software professional world versus a blue collar workforce in the hardware industrial world. Both equally important, by the way. Certainly not saying that one is more important than the other, but just creating these different cultures that really need different work environments, different policies, and different leadership. All right, so as we thought about taking these three disparate software organizations, putting them under one command structure, we had a few different guiding principles. So again, wanted to put it under one structure to allow leadership to be able to make decisions that were really key to software and software professionals. Wanted to be aligned under a leader who had the expertise to be able to make those decisions effectively. We wanted to implement this in a phased approach to help with change management. Anyone's ever been a part of an organization that's gone through rapid change, especially when you're talking about an organization of our size? I didn't mention this at the beginning, but this is 5,500 people within the Air Force in this organization. You have to be very careful how quickly you implement things because change management matters. And then certainly wanted to increase effectiveness and efficiency of our software capability, develop metrics to make sure that we're measuring this new organization in a way that makes sense. And then heading into what Dr. Stringer is going to talk about here in a second, we want to foster an environment that really drives innovation. So if you haven't heard of Amy Webb, Dr. Amy Webb, she is a futurist, a consultant who consults for Fortune 50 companies. Highly encouraged to look her up. She's phenomenal. I got to hear her speak a couple of years ago at a project management conference. But she really kind of came up with this idea, thinking about strategic planning and sort of phased implementations of change. Of using a time cone as opposed to a timeline for your way of thinking. And the idea here is that as you progress further into the future in your thinking, the amount of certainty that you have in terms of what the conditions are going to be in which you're operating, what sort of barriers you're going to be facing, all of that becomes so much more murky, right? Because no one has a crystal ball. You don't exactly know what's going to happen in 10 or plus years. So really important to think about your planning in this construct. So 1 to 2 years out, it's much easier. Save the current administration, much easier to predict what your conditions are going to be like. And so it makes planning at a tactical level much more certain. And then the further you go out, that certainty lessens. So your thinking needs to be more strategic, more visionary, and then certainly at the kind of far end of this cone, what systems level change do you want to prepare to impact? You might not know exactly how you're going to get there because, again, the certainty of what you're going to be dealing with is less. But that is really kind of the approach that we use to building this new organization, planning it out, and then executing. And so we were established about 2 years ago. So we are now kind of moving into this strategy phase of our organization. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex, who's going to talk about what we're doing in this phase.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Alex Stringer. I am a researcher and engineer focused on machine learning here in Oklahoma. So what I want to talk about a little bit to build off of some of what Megan was discussing is what's called the acquisition lifecycle. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, I promise. But to lay out the framework, this is the way that traditionally the Department of Defense and large-scale organizations tend to approach technology development. Particularly in the federal government, we go through what's called the acquisition cycle, where we obtain new technologies. It is a very structured setup, and it has these very clearly defined gateways as we progress through technology development. And as Megan was mentioning earlier, Tinker, that we are located with here, was focused here on the very far end, operations and sustainment. So one thing I want to frame out here is, while it looks like operations and sustainment is a very small piece of this overall life cycle, it covers about 90% of the overall sort of development and operations time of a platform.
Yeah, the B-52 is a perfect example.
It absolutely is, yes. So that's a huge portion of the life cycle that we used to support here at Tinker, still do within the software directorate. However, as anyone who's worked with code or really with modern engineering systems today knows, you don't get this nice clean transition between technology readiness, and that's particularly true with software. Software today is kind of this ever-living, constantly evolving thing. And so trying to make it fit within this framework where you can just say, cool, you know, now we're no longer doing material solutions analysis, which is really the research phase. That just means you're looking at what is out there and what are the possibilities. You will keep returning to that solutions analysis phase periodically. And so we have this more cyclical process to software today that doesn't really fit well within this traditional acquisition lifecycle. So this idea of software sustainment, which is where the software directorate, the component elements of it kind of arose, it's really not applicable to modern life. I have this here. Lines of code is not a good way of analyzing the complexity of a system, but it does give you a general sense of the scale. So you can see this is a logarithmic scale. So we go from less than 1,000 lines of code on an entire aircraft back in the 1960s to almost 100 million lines of code on modern aircraft today. So the general complexity of software systems on aircraft today has grown massively. Along with that, our systems are highly interconnected and they are dependent on those interconnections. We used to have very mechanically focused systems. Now we have very software-driven systems. And you have all of these different software systems that need to interact with one another and not break during that interaction. So the complexity of that cycle has just grown massively over the last 50 to 60 years. So now, the Air Force and the federal government as a whole is moving towards what's called the software acquisition lifecycle, which is a much sort of more, it's an iterative or cyclical process, which makes a lot more sense for that software domain. You are constantly going through redesigns, reimplementations, evaluation, testing. It is a constant and evolving and living kind of thing, software today. So part of the challenge as we've changed the software directorate is how do you actually fit what is a historically sustainment-focused organization to this type of life cycle? And again, when you have 5,500 to 6,000 people within that organization, making that change is difficult. People are very used to the way that they do things, and that change management process becomes very difficult. So you have to kind of take it one step at a time. So the steps that we have gone through, I would say this has started in earnest between 6 to 10 years ago. We started very much this traditional maintenance focused, living over here in operations and maintenance. About 10 years ago or so, there was a push to have advanced development teams that are focused on engaging with the currently under development platforms rather than the ones that are just in operations and sustainment phase. That way we can provide sort of continuous service. We don't have a giant 100 million line code base dumped on our doorstep with no idea of how it works and be asked to sustain it. We actually develop that knowledge over time. From there, about 5 to 6 years ago, we stood up these advanced prototyping teams. Actually, I'm going to say this was 7 to 8 years ago. We stood up these advanced prototyping teams called EDGE. And they are engaged sort of in the conceptual phase of projects. As we are starting to develop initial prototypes These teams are meant to move very quickly, to adapt very quickly, and to change efforts from year to year so they can support our most advanced customers. And then most recently, back in about 2020, Megan and I and a small team set up what is now called the Software Office of Research and Development to kind of provide complete support across the entire acquisition lifecycle for software. So we are engaging directly with the research communities as well as our most advanced customers to identify what capabilities are coming next. Because the challenge, particularly with modern software capabilities like machine learning, is you can't just make the decision that you're going to support those capabilities. Machine learning in particular has massive data and computational requirements, and you have to build up infrastructure. And when you're talking about a 5,500 person organization, that infrastructure is huge. So it takes a lot of time to be able to build that up and engage with these most advanced technologies. So you really need to be identifying them at the very beginning, during the R&D phase, so that you can get that in your cycle, you can get those stood up before those capabilities, again, hit your doorstep. And I will say one of the other things I'm very proud of for SWORD, which I will kind of highlight here, there are 3 elements to this. The first one we stood up is called Department 70, which is an education-focused organization. So we are providing opportunities to fund people's education for master's and doctoral degrees within the Air Force. I'm very proud of that. It offers a lot of opportunities to people. It helps to upskill our workforce, and particularly here in Oklahoma, it offers those advanced education opportunities to people who might not traditionally have access to those opportunities. I myself am actually a recent graduate of one of those opportunities, so I'm also very grateful for their existence. Forge is more focused on our applied research side, and that is essentially trying to identify those up-and-coming technologies that we need to prepare our organization for, and getting deeply connected into that sort of advanced R&D software world as quickly as possible. And then partnerships is what ties it all together, which is Megan's focus area. And that is connecting to all of the education institutions around our various locations, making sure that we are connected into the federal labs, developing all of these cool opportunities to engage with the academic, research, and advanced development communities. So that has been a huge culture shift, but we are 5 years in. This organization has been stood up. It exists at different levels today. It is being spread out to our other sites. We started it here at Tinker, but we're now expanding it out to the other 2 sites. And we're very excited to see kind of what the future holds for that. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.